listener production. Talking about consent or even hearing about it may be triggering for some people. This includes those who have experienced or are experiencing sexual violence or other forms of trauma. Support is available at 1-800-RESPECT, National Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Counselling Service, and information is also available at Consent.gov.au.
Hey, Bension Siebert here with you for episode 2 of this 4-part series in The Briefing, brought to you in conjunction with the federal government's campaign Consent Can't Wait. Statistics show 1 in 3 teenagers aged 18 to 19 have experienced at least one form of intimate partner violence in the last 12 months. A separate study found 1 in 12 teenagers have experienced sexual abuse by someone that they were dating. And other research commissioned by the government found almost half of all Australian adults, that's 48%, see the topic of sexual consent as a grey area and are conflicted in their understanding of consent. It's a lot more than no means no. It isn't a transaction where one person gives or another person gets consent. This is clearly a big topic and it's time to talk about it. Matt OKine is an ARIA award-winning actor, writer and presenter and co-host of Matt and Alex All Day Breakfast podcast. Matt, welcome to The Briefing.
Thank you so much for having me, Bension.
Matt, so as I mentioned, Australians are confused about consent, frankly, and that's one of the reasons why the federal government is running this campaign. So one key part of this, I suppose, is that consent is just one skill in a set of emotional skills regarding relationships and sex that include empathy, communication, and also handling rejection.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I think of sexual consent and I hear those statistics, especially revolving around young people, it makes me sort of think back to what sex was like as I was growing up or trying to understand what it was. And I think that there felt like for a little while there that it was somewhat of a solo endeavor. And, you know, hearing the discussion around consent really revolving more around a free-flowing constant that absolutely involves the other is a really healthy place to start so that the sexual relationships are really healthy and that they're enjoyable and that they're enjoyable for everyone. So it's not just, you know, you're not just on this sort of quest to get consent, that it's actually just something that exists throughout the whole experience.
Another important part about it is that it has to be enthusiastic. I think when I was growing up and getting into older teenagehood and starting to have a relationship with sex and sexuality, the thing that really clicked for me was it's not just someone saying yes or indicating yes. It has to be enthusiastic.
No, totally. And, you know, as you grow and understand yourself better and understand others better, you see how important it is for, you know, you realize that sex is something that is only enjoyable if everyone is enjoying it. You know, you should be wanting everyone to have an enjoyable, good time. When we were growing up, there was sort of this mentality, I guess. It was something to sex was something to achieve. As a young guy, I remember sort of wanting to achieve sex as though it somehow qualified me as a person. It validated me. And I think that any sort of, you know, young person who's entering sex with that mindset will then fall into a trap of not realizing the importance of it being a really enjoyable experience for everyone involved. I feel very grateful that this conversation is happening and that people can start sort of switching the mindset, especially for me, you know, once being a young guy, to sort of making sure that sex is in some sort of self-validation.
So let's hear now from an expert. It's Daniel Principe. He's a youth ambassador and he's a consent educator. And here he is talking about that point about enthusiastic consent.
I think the whole push for consent education and this campaign in particular is actually that invitation to realize that this is just so essential to all relationships, not just romantic, not just sexual, but our interactions with others. This is actually just part of the suite of skills that we develop in terms of our EQ, our ability to be in tune with others, check in with others, find out what other people are thinking and feeling. And for us to actually care about that, to want that, not just to work out what can I get away with or what do the rules say, but what I love is that this is encouraging all of us to think about, well, how does this other person experience this moment? What do they like? What do they desire? And can we have a conversation, a mutual exchange of working out what that is and how we can hopefully meet each other's needs and make sure everybody walks away feeling like they were heard, they were seen, they were respected, they experienced what they wanted to out of whether that's a sexual experience or just relationship, a date, in fact.
So that brings us nicely to the concept of consent as not just about not breaking the law and not just about doing the absolute minimum that's required to get consent, but that it's a communication, that everyone is trying to have a good time and you need to check in at every point.
Yeah, I mean, when we were growing up, I remember it being no means no. But the fact now that the conversation revolves so much more around, yes means yes, means that that space between no means no and yes means yes is huge. And I think that's that gray area that people talk about when they say, oh, it's a gray area, and there's 40, however many percent of Australian adults think that that's a gray area. It's making that transition from no means no to yes means yes. And that's a very necessary transition. I keep thinking about what sort of younger people often try to achieve when it comes to sex, and that is this sort of self-validation. And growing up, it felt like there was young guys who wanted to have sex, desperately wanted to have sex, and they wanted to have sex because that made them a man, that made them cool, that made them, validated them in some way. Oh, the guys would do whatever they can, do whatever dance they could, whatever peacocking they could, whatever sort of persuasion they could to try and get the girl to, and literally it comes down to the language, give it up, as if consent was something that you had to give away or offer over or something like that. Sounds like such a weirdly disgusting one-sided transaction. The fact now that it revolves around enthusiasm and enjoyment, and I really love Daniel's mention there of respect, that it's actually respect. That, you want to leave a sexual relationship or any sort of sexual interaction with this understanding that both parties have been respected.
Yeah, I definitely remember when I was in high school, people talking about getting a girlfriend as if the girlfriend was a possession that you could try and get. Part of my education about consent was learning about non-orthodox sexual practices, things that involve like domination and submission, where in those kinds of spaces, the language around consent is very highly developed. It's not just with regular sexual interaction, it's not just with relationships, but every kind of relationship interaction that you're having with another person, you need to find ways to establish consent.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't even have to be those extremes either. I mean, I'm not to say that sort of, domination, et cetera, is an extreme, but that's certainly one end of the spectrum. It's really interesting that consent can apply to so many different instances, even in the one overall sexual experience with another person. You've constantly got to be checking in and going, hey, is that okay? And if it's not, then certainly, having that discussion.
It sounds like also in that kind of sexual interaction where you're sort of the dominant partner in that interaction, your consent matters too.
The respect thing I keep coming back to because I feel like, and it's not just younger people who have fallen into that trap as well. I've certainly fallen into the trap of having sex for reasons that weren't to have a really beautiful connection with another human being. As I've been older, I remember having a bad breakup and then feeling like sex was some sort of validation again. And having a sexual experience with, someone and leaving it thinking I didn't do enough there to show the respect that I have for that person, and that always makes you feel really kind of just bad because there's not a issue with consent, but you do want people to look back fondly on every sort of experience they have instead of feeling like you were in it for the wrong reasons.
And when you're in those moments, it doesn't have to feel sort of awkward or formal asking for consent either. It's about pleasure and consent for everyone. So you could ask, is this okay? Does this feel good? But it's all about sort of reading the room and checking in.
Absolutely. Like I love the idea of communication more. I love it. And people sort of think that it might be awkward, but I kind of think that it's hot. Am I allowed to say that? Communication, I think, can be super hot, and it doesn't have to be like. It feels like there's either dirty talk or there's like nothing, But hearing things like "do this" or "do that" or do you want me to do this? Do you want me to do that? Those things are they're great, I think that they always make the experience a million times better if both people are just actively talking about what they want and how they're feeling throughout the whole experience.
And Daniel has a really good point that he makes about this. Let's hear that now.
I think with that, in terms of being able to read physical signs, facial expressions, of course, there's verbal communication in other ways. And it's really up to us to want to be in tune. And I think these are great skills to have, like that translate far beyond a bedroom, but actually being able to realize what is someone communicating with their eyes, with their body language, with their posture? Are they withdrawing? Do they look uncomfortable? Have they stiffened up? Are they withdrawing? And I think there's an opportunity to then check in with that person, because if it's not just about me taking something from them, but actually wanting everybody to have a good time and wanting them to make sure they feel safe, respected, and that they're enjoying this, then there's an invitation to check in at that point and say, is this okay? I think where we need to be really mindful as well is that some people, based on their own previous experiences sexually or their own trauma, they may actually fawn. So some people might go into fight or flight, and that could be something that you discern, but then someone else may actually be like appeasing. They may actually try to be kind and gentle because they're trying to protect themselves in a scenario where maybe they feel that there's an imbalance. And so I think it's really important that at the end of the day, if our intention is that we want everybody to walk away from this experience feeling that they were seen, heard, that they enjoyed themselves, then I think even if someone is responding in a way to try and keep themselves safe, we really need to check in and go further and make sure, like, are they really okay?
So another part of this that we should really talk about is perhaps a misconception that consenting to a kind of sexual activity means consenting to all kinds of sexual activity or more different kinds of sexual activity in that same interaction. I've certainly had the experience of being really keen at the start of a sexual interaction and not necessarily maintaining that feeling that I want to keep going. Have you ever had that kind of scenario, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because you want to, whenever you're having a sexual relationship with anyone, there's sometimes a party who will want to do things that maybe the other person has never done before, or, they want to show a certain technique or style of something that they might think is really good and the other person might really enjoy. But, if you find yourself needing to convince someone to do something, then that's probably not a great place to be in. That doesn't mean that you can't have the conversation about, hey, this is something that, I've thought about trying and, I'm wondering whether you'd like to try it as well, etc. But, if you're ever finding yourself going, oh, no, come on, you'll really like it and blah, 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 that feels to me like it's crossing that boundary now as well. So, again, it's just that constant conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, and also the idea that you don't have to have a reason not to want to do something. And
Totally.
You don't have to have a reason to stop wanting to do something that you decided that you wanted to do beforehand either.
Oh, totally. No, totally. And I mean, especially when you're trying something for the first time, because you might think that you want to do it. And as soon as it starts, you go, you know what? I don't like this at all. And I love that, as you said, you don't need to give an excuse or anything.
So overall, the reality is no matter what your sexual preferences are, no matter what you're into, it's important to make sure that everyone genuinely and enthusiastically wants to take part in a sexual activity, that everyone understands what's involved and any possible consequences of that act. Consent has to be affirmative, meaning sexual partners need to actively say or do something to check for consent every time, no matter what is going on. Matt OKine, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Pension.
That was Matt OKine, award-winning comedian and co-host of Matt and Alex All Day Breakfast. If you'd like to know more about consent or how to have conversations or to equip yourself with tools to help educate someone, check your understanding and go to consent.gov.au. That's consent.gov.au. That's it for this episode, and just a reminder, this is episode 2 of a 4-part series we're doing on consent in partnership with the federal government as part of its Consent Can't Wait campaign. Thanks for listening. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.